basic issue for us is self-determination. It's to be able to live in America with some degree of dignity. It's to have some control over our own destiny. In the area of politics, we can control black communities, north, south, east, and west. And by controlling, say, the city of Detroit, with a majority of black people voting as a black bloc, we can control the politics of the state of Michigan. Now, if you multiply that by all of the cities in which black people are now coming into a majority, we'll have a black bloc vote that can have a tremendous influence not only on state governments, but also on the national government.
Aquaba. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Black Slate Atlanta podcast. The Black Slate is an independent, not-for-profit social and political action team. Our goal is to tackle the issues affecting our low to moderate income communities in the Atlanta area. We will focus on topics that are centered around impacting legislation and decisions that target our neighborhoods. Through commentary and interviews, we hope you will find the Black Slate Atlanta podcast beneficial and enlightening. And now, here's our host.
Welcome, viewers, to another Black Slate ATL podcast. Today, we're fortunate to have attorney Kamau Franklin, founder of Community Movement Builders and one of the co-organizers of the Stop Cop City resistance movement here in the city of Atlanta. Our moderator today will be Malaika Jabali, author of the just published book, It's Not You, It's Capitalism. With that, I'll turn it over to Sister Malaika.
Thank you, Black Slate ATL, for having us. And Kamau, Brother Kamau, I'm so looking forward to having this conversation. You moderated a conversation that I had about my book, and so I get to return the favor. And it was excellent moderation, by the way. So I get to talk to you about the amazing work that you have been doing. And let's just jump right into it, because I know you all are very busy with this Cop City work. Can you just talk briefly, what is Cop City?
Cop City is basically a militarized police training center that is being built or planned to be built by the Atlanta Police Department, the City of Atlanta, and the Atlanta Police Foundation. It was something that was created or thought back up, or the plans were dusted off, I think is the best way to say it, after the 2020 uprisings. It is a militarized training center, one that is scheduled to be housed in a forest that is adjacent to a working class Black community, where they're going to be cutting down immediately over 100 acres of that forest, a forest that was promised to that adjacent Black community for purposes of campsites, walking trails, experiences in the woods. All of those plans were thrown out when they decided to do the opposite of what organizers and activists and the larger community was calling for, which was finding alternatives to public safety. Instead of finding alternatives, they have doubled down on police violence.
Following up on that, you mentioned that these plans kind of got dusted off in the wake of the 2020 George Floyd uprisings and protests, which is a bit ironic because the whole purpose of that is to think more broadly about abolition, to think more radically about how we can do things differently. But they're doing, like you said, doing the opposite. Can you talk about those connections between the work that you had been doing with Rayshard Brooks, if you want to get into the background of that in Atlanta, and how that might be aligned at all with the Cop City movement? So the movement to bring Cop City into the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually perfectly aligned, as in it was the actual response of the city. Like, as when you said, when people were in the streets around George Floyd, Breonna Taylor here in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks, who was murdered at a Wendy's, when people were calling for defunding, abolition, finding alternatives to public safety, again, the police and the city decided to double down on police violence. Now, why they did this? They did this for a couple of reasons. One is the obvious reason, to continue over policing of Black communities, having a police force which they feel is trained enough to keep going with the gentrification, which is rampant here in Atlanta. The other reason is that they saw themselves as being under threat, as the larger country did, by uprisings against police violence. And they wanted to have a police training center, a cop city where they can train in urban mobilization or urban warfare, they can train in crowd control, where they could do training with police from all across the country, including internationally with the IDF, the Israeli police force, on tactics and strategies to suppress movement activity and organizers. So they dusted these plans off and decided to build this monstrosity because they wanted to attack organizers and activists and again continue the over policing of Black people here in Atlanta. I'll leave with this. In Atlanta, a city that is used to be considered the Black Mecca, where it used to be 60% plus of a Black population, is now lower than 50% of the Black population. Yet, 90% of the arrests that happen in Atlanta slash Fulton County is of Black people. And this is going to continue on the auspices of having a police force which supposedly is fighting crime, but really is terrorizing the larger Black community.
Now, Mayor Andre Dickens says that having more police training will actually help them when they respond in cases like Rayshard Brooks, for instance. So, in cases where they might be encountering Black people, having invested millions of dollars into police training would improve their interactions with Black people. Do you buy that?
Not at all. Atlanta is already the most overtrained policing agency in the state of Georgia. It has received training through and through. When crime statistics are up, so called crime statistics, it's receiving training. When crime statistics are dropping, it's receiving training. Training has nothing to do with the ability of the Atlanta police force to do its quote unquote job. And I say that because the job of the Atlanta police force is not really to fight crime, right? And that is the propaganda that we're given. The real reason for any police force is safety and security for private property and for developers and for those who have power. And the only training that they're really going to get on this overextensive large S police training ground is again when it's about controlling communities, not when it's about fighting crime. There is no correlation whatsoever in any study, any endeavor that's ever been taken that's shown any correlation between either increased training or even the amount of police and a reduction in so-called criminal activity. So those things are things they throw out for the public to hear, things that are supposed to be reassuring to us. But again, Atlanta receives more training than any municipal police force in the state of Georgia, and it's been that way for the longest time period.
Hmm. Now, something you mentioned is that police are there to protect the interests of property. Now, I like to critique capitalism and making those kinds of connections. Can you talk about the corporate incentive behind this and the corporations that have supported the Atlanta Police Foundation, who this lease is for?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that is should be like starkly scary for people is the amount of private capital and private control that is going to happen over the Atlanta Police and over the Atlanta Police Agency by the Atlanta Police Foundation. The Atlanta Police Foundation receives millions and millions of dollars, not only from the city itself, but from private corporations, corporations like Delta, Home Depot, Chick-fil-A, Coca-Cola, every major every major corporation that has a headquarters in Atlanta. In fact, multinational corporations that don't have headquarters have donated to the Atlanta Police Foundation, which has made the Atlanta Police Foundation the second biggest police foundation in the whole country, even though the Atlanta Police Force is no bigger than the 20th police force in the whole country. So here we have a testing ground. The same corporations that said Black Lives Matter are the same corporations that have invested heavily into this militarized training ground because for them, it's about making sure that control of the police and the activities of the police are directed towards the means and mechanisms that they want it directed towards. Currently, as in most urban cities, Atlanta is going through a tremendous gentrification process. That is being led by the police who are over ticketing people, again, over arresting people, over policing people. That is the role that the police hold. And when people are in the streets involved in fighting back against police violence or other policy measures, the city of Atlanta, as well as these corporations, want to make sure that the police department is in a position to push these people off the street as soon as possible. For the city of Atlanta and for these corporations, what they want is quiet. What they want is stability. What they want is for us to be consumers and not for us to be active participants in how resources are spent in our name, our resources ourselves. So the connection is direct. This training center will be controlled by a private entity, a 501c3, which is a private entity, which is in effect funded through corporations.
Hmm. Now, how do we get to this place? Because you talked about Atlanta once being 60% Black. Now we're no longer the majority. And I don't think a lot of people know that because we're so busy calling it a Black Mecca. It's another chocolate city. This is where Black people go. It's Black Hollywood. And all of these glittery, glitzy things are happening on the surface. So, how do we get to a point where we have so much of this, I would say, reactionary politics with Black people in power?
Well, I mean, Atlanta is also famous for what's called the Atlanta Way, right? Which has basically been the connection between white capital and Black so called political leadership, right? And so, what we've had here for the last 50 or 60 years is basically an agreement. And that agreement has been between Black politicians, Black elected officials, and white capital. Black elected officials will run the city. That's why you had here in Atlanta, you didn't have a real civil rights movement here in Atlanta. You had people from the civil rights movement who came from Atlanta, but you had already an agreement in Atlanta that there would not be demonstrations and so forth on the street. Basically, the idea is that the Black majority can lead, but they'll lead in the direction in which white capital tells them to. Vis a vis, think of South Africa post apartheid, where you have Black leadership, you have Black folks in high spaces who are claiming to represent the population, the populace. But at hand, what they really do behind closed doors and backroom dealing, and who finances their campaigns, is that they're being led by developers and corporations who are really saying where what Atlanta should be and where Atlanta should go. And that's why we have this decrease in the Black population. That's why we've had a stripping away of all public housing in Atlanta. That's why when we had the Olympics, we had people like Andy Young giving one-way bus tickets to homeless people to get them out of the city. That's when we had people who were picked up in jail to get them off the streets so that the city could look a certain way for tourists to come in. So there's long been this bargain between the political elite, the Black political elite, and the economic forces which run Atlanta, which has always been detrimental to working class and poor Black people who are now being kicked out of the city. Atlanta is becoming, again, a sundown city, not strictly because of race, but with the class analysis, right? If you work in Atlanta, if you have working class jobs, you're here to do service jobs, you're here to work in restaurants and so forth. You can be in Atlanta, but when your shift is over, you're expected to get out. You're expected to leave. And that's the kind of city that's being developed right now.
Hmm. Now, going back to the issue of public safety, we know Black people care about crime happening in our neighborhoods. We want to make sure that families feel safe, that people can walk home and feel like they have security when they arrive at their doorstep or walking around their neighborhood. So, what do you tell people? What's, I guess, some good messaging people can use to respond to those who say, well, we do need cops and we do need them to be trained if we are going to have cops?
I usually start off, I ask people, what are the safest communities in America? Are they the communities with squad cars on every corner? Are they the communities who have their young people stopped and frisked and have their pants lowered on the street so they can check? Those aren't the safest communities. The safest communities in America are the communities with resources. And so, if we want safe communities, we need to have control over our community. We need to have resources that we can invest in our community. We need to have a say in who comes to be direct and who goes in our community. We can't have people coming in and putting businesses which only chase us out. And so we're really concerned about our safety and the stability of our community. Our fight is not to get more police. Our fight is not to get more police training. Our fight is to get resources, to grab our fair share of resources that we day to day invest in this city. That is the only way our communities will ever be safe. We have to create the organizations, the allegiances, the connections, so that we have power over what happens in our community, so that we control the institutions that come into our community or that are based in our community. If we don't control those institutions, and those institutions really mean harm for us, those institutions are not there for us, they're not there to serve us. And so any conversation I have with people is like, of course, we're worried about danger and crime and the rest of it. But the institutions who have been in our community for literally hundreds of years have never solved the problem of crime in our communities, because that is not their role. Their role is to over police. Their role is to take our young people out of our communities. Their role is to make us scared of each other. Until we get together and unify, we will not have safety in our communities.
That's a word right there. And we've got some folks behind the scenes who are, I'm seeing hand claps, I'm seeing head shakes and all of that. And I hope our watchers are feeling and getting that word is resonating with them as well. So along those lines, unifying and working together, what is the Stop Cop City protest movement about, and where does it stand right now?
Well, the Stop Cop City movement is a movement that came out of, as we spoke about earlier, the movement against police violence. It was late in 2020, maybe even early 2021, when we heard about the idea of Cop City. And so you had organizers and activists and community people from across the board. You had everything from anarchists to civil rights workers, to voting rights workers, to community organizers, to environmentalists, a whole swath of different types of people, mostly from Atlanta. I want to be clear, mostly from Atlanta, who have lived in Atlanta a long time, despite the propaganda of the city and the state to say something different. Those organizers and activists and environmentalists and civil rights workers have worked for years to try to stop Cop City from being built. We've used regular organizing methods, demonstrations, town halls, speak outs, and so forth. And even at our earliest iterations, it's important to note that the police would raid our rallies and demonstrations and arrest people. And then later on, when some of the strategy switched to a defend the forest movement, that is when the police stepped up their tactics. And then they started raiding the forest and charging people with domestic terrorism and later with RICO charges. And as we also know, in January of this year, they killed the first environmental activist in the United States to be killed by the state, Tortuguita Charan. So ever since we started this battle to stop Cop City, the police have been violent towards organizers, activists, and community forces. We've used various tactics. Those tactics have included, again, the demonstrations to referendum proposals, even direct action and civil disobedience. And those tactics have been vast. And this movement will continue. But we are reaching an inflection point in this movement, right? The city has basically captured the land. It has stalled our referendum process. We have over 61 people who have been charged with domestic terrorism and RICO charges, racketeering charges. We are defending those folks, setting up infrastructure for that. So we understand that at this inflection point, that we have to be geared not only to continue the work on Cop City, but what is the further work of all these people who've gathered around these organizations and these collectives? It is to continue to do grassroots movements and to step up and to take control of the politics of Atlanta. Basically, the next step for all of us is to fight back against the Atlanta way, to make sure that as we are working on the grassroots levels, those who are interested in electoral politics are working to kick out and to get rid of the city council people. We're starting to plan for doing people's assemblies at the beginning of the year, in which we can get the masses of people from Atlanta involved directly in trying to organize around what is it that they want to see happen in Atlanta, how do they want to see it, and how much are they willing to fight to see it. So Cop City battle will continue, but we understand that our larger battle, our next battle, is to hold this unity together across the left spectrum and also to produce victories for people in the electoral field and in the grassroots field. There's other battles emerging. Fulton County is trying to build a $1.7 billion jail. So there's other battles that are looming, including the Cop City battle. And so this movement effectively will continue because the bad policies of the development forces, the developmental forces, and the politicians on their side, they continue to do all they can to wreck the city. We must continue to struggle and fight to make sure that the city stays Black, that it stays a safe haven for working class and poor Black folks, and that we fight like hell to build and to win over institutions that we control for our people and our purposes.
All right. Now, you mentioned the referendum. I read that right now there are some proceedings to verify the signatures on the petition. So people went around the city, gathered petitions, and were aiming to put it on the ballot. Can you talk more about the referendum process? If the signatures aren't considered valid, does that mean that that's over? Will it not be able to go up for an election? Just talk more about that process.
Sure. So we started the referendum process after the city decided in late June to give over $70 million to the Atlanta Police Foundation to actually build this monstrosity. And so another switch was made in the movement strategy to do a referendum process, something that's not normally done here in Atlanta. Part of that referendum process is that we had to collect roughly 54,000 signatures within 60 days. We started on that collection fight. People were out in the streets, including the Black Slate Project. Everybody was out in the street collecting. We collected well over 130,000 signatures. The issue started to become that the city of Atlanta started to put out that it would start to use what's called signature match and exact match, which basically means that it would have somebody who would try to match individual signatures to try to see if those signatures were the same signatures. And if they decided they weren't, they would throw them out. It decided to use exact match, which means that it would look at each and every category on the voting file to make sure that it matched with each and every category on the signature petition page. And if they found that a apartment number was off or not listed, or if an address had been changed, which happens many times, then they decided that they would throw those things off. That led to a further court challenge, which had already begun when the city of Atlanta barred any non-resident of Atlanta proper from participating. And DeKalb County residents wanted to participate. And so there was a lawsuit to make sure that they could participate. The judge sided with us, extended the time period, and said that we could have people from DeKalb County participate. The city of Atlanta decided to not count when we turned in our signatures. The city of Atlanta decided that it would not verify the signatures. And so it held them in abeyance, saying it was waiting for the court case to be decided. There was nothing that prevented the city of Atlanta or currently prevents the city of Atlanta from verifying those signatures without using signature match or exact match. There's also nothing that stops the Atlanta City Council itself from putting its own petition on the ballot without even looking at the signatures or collecting the signatures. The city of Atlanta has the city council has the power in and of itself to put something on as a petition for referendum purposes. They've delayed. The purposes of their delaying is to allow the city to continue trying to build out Cop City. In other words, to try to change the facts on the ground. And so we are currently in court. There was just a hearing and a motion and arguments were given, which folks were arguing that this process should continue and that the verification of those signatures should continue, with the city arguing that the verification of the signatures does not have to happen and that the petition process should be thrown out. Right now, judges are, I guess, in the judge's hands to make that decision. But whether or not they decide in our favor or not and allow this referendum to happen, what's really important for people to understand again is that the city council could have put this petition or put a petition on the ballot for referendum purposes, and it could have started the counting the day we gave them in to verify whether or not we made those numbers or not. So basically, they're telling well over 100,000 people to that their vote, that their insistence on letting the people decide does not count. They do not want the people of Atlanta to decide because they are scared that the people of Atlanta, as all polls have shown, are against the building of Cop City. Particularly, there is a majority of Black people who are against the building of Cop City. They don't want this to go to the polls. So they are trying to stop this from happening through the court procedure, and they're trying to stop this by happening by delaying, and saying that the facts on the ground have changed. And so therefore, it doesn't matter anyway if this gets on the ballot and people get to vote.
What's really interesting about that to me is that these are some of the same politicians come every election who talk about how democracy is on the ballot, that every election is the most critical that we can ever be a part of because our democracy is at stake. And here we have a live example of tens of thousands of people who are trying to let their voice heard through our democratic process. And it almost seems like there is a conspiracy against it because you have so many layers of the city from, legislatively and obviously with the business community and with the mayor's administration who are bucking against it. So I really, I'm really hoping people are paying attention to what these elected officials are doing and also paying attention to when they're going to be up for reelection.
What's really important too, in addition to that, is to see how Republicans and Democrats are working together hand in hand to
Mm,
criminalize the movement against Cop City and to stop the people from voting. So again, it was the Democrats who decided to use signature match and exact match, the same things that they had sued the Republicans when the Republicans wanted to use it against Stacey Abrams in her gubernatorial campaign. So the Democrats and the Republicans have like walked hand in hand on this issue. The two things that they, for the most part, agree upon all the time are protecting cops and capitalism. And so here we have these so-called Democrats, not exclusively black at this particular stage, but still a significant amount of black politicians again going against, as you said, the democratic process. When over 100,000 people have said, all we want to do is vote. Let us decide. This is such a controversial project. It was done in private. It was done behind closed doors. People had no idea what was happening until it was announced. They've never had their own town halls to let people come and talk about it. We had to have the town halls to let people come and talk about it. All folks are saying is let us make this final decision. They refuse to let it happen because they're scared of what the results are, and because they're in the pockets of the lobbyists of the corporations and of the police, the Atlanta Police Foundation in particular, that they will not let this go to the ballot. They will not allow people to vote because they don't respect democracy. What they respect is the power of corporations to rule over Atlanta and to rule over Black lives.
such powerful, powerful words, Brother Kamau. And this is going to be the last question I pose to you. We got activists in the room, and hopefully some activists watching us. So of course we need to know action steps. After hearing this, the movement is not just about Cop City. It's about looking at an entire philosophy of Atlanta. And I would say the whole country where capital and police are prioritized. So beyond even getting involved in the Stop Cop City movement and, community movement builders is doing that, how can people be a part of a movement? What kind of organizing work can they be be a part of to just reject that ideology altogether? What are some options for people?
We're at a particular place and point in this country where Black people are overtly under attack. They're under attack from right wing forces, they're under attack by neoliberal forces. We have to organize our people like never before. We have to take the lessons of the past and reconstitute those to say that we need militant, strong, protective organization. So the things that people can do is either join or start something. If they can't find something that meets their purposes, then they gotta join something. I mean, they gotta start something. People have to be organized. They have to be organized to protect again the interests of Black people, to fight against police violence and police brutality. They have to work to fight against the policy issues that are coming down the pike that are going to be against our larger community, that are pushing us out of various places around this country. They have to fight because right wing, white, conservative militias are strapped. Those folks have weapons. Those folks have unity. Those folks have organization. We don't currently have enough of any of that to protect ourselves. The government is not going to protect us because they're going to be on the side too much of these conservative, right wing militias, because half of them are in the militias in the first place. And so, if we're not organizing ourselves or our communities, if we're not finding and figuring out ways in which we can have our ownership over land, over property, over ways in which we can grow food, over ways in which we can control our housing, over ways in which we control our politics, then we're just not taking this moment seriously. So, yes, this is way beyond Cop City. Cop City is one issue that we can work on, but there are so many other things that are impacting communities from around the country in which folks have to organize. And then, really quick, secondly, folks have to unite across the country. We need organizations that are national and international in scope. Capital is not a local phenomenon. Capital is both national and international. Capital moves and is fluid. We need organizations that are fluid. We need organizations that have national and international reach, because we need to hook up with our brothers and sisters in Africa. We need to be internationalists and support self-determining movements as in Palestine. We need to make sure that we are a world people on a world stage, and no one can confine us to the policies and practices to the people that enslaved us. So when we say we have to organize, we have to be ready, willing, and able to fight back against the capitalist white supremacist machine, which is trying to destroy us and our communities and continue to have control and hegemony over resources, not only in our communities, but all across the world. Our fight is a fight for our very survival, and that's the time period that we are in.
Amen. Now, that was incredible, and I want to, also give you the floor if you've got some resources for people who might be in Atlanta. If you want to plug your own organization, how can they find you? What are some of the groups that you work with that people who might be based in Atlanta, or even if they're watching this from afar, what could they join?
Well, yes, there is community movement builders. We have chapters in 7 cities: Atlanta, New York, Detroit, Dallas, Sacramento, LA, Delaware. Any Black person can join that organization. There's BAP, Black Alliance for Peace, which is a national and internationally framed organization. There are other locally based organizations and other groups that are popping up. And again, join an organization or start one. Here in Atlanta, folks should just look around and see what they think is missing. And again, they should figure out ways to get involved in community, whether they have spiritual practices and they can join a group like the Shrine of the Black Madonna, whether or not they want to work on particular policy issues. There are ways in which people can get involved. Our website is communitymovementbuilders.org if you want to find out more about us. info@communitymovementbuilders.org if you want to write us directly and talk to us. We're open for business and open for membership, as they say.
Ashe. So thank you again, Brother Kamau, and thank you for those who are watching Black Slate ATL podcast. I hope this was informative for you, enlightening for you, and motivational so that you can get out there and get involved in this work, because as Brother Kamau said, we are at an inflection point. We don't have time for the distractions. We can, we need rest, obviously, as a people, but we don't have time to sleep. We have to stay conscious of what is happening around us. So thanks for joining.
Thank you for joining us for the Black Slate Atlanta podcast, where we address issues that impact our communities in the Atlanta area. Please let us know if you would like to join and help us address the issues that impact the legislation and decisions which affect our neighborhoods and our daily lives. We hope you found the Black Slate Atlanta podcast to be beneficial and enlightening. If you have any topics or issues that you would like us to address, or if you would like to volunteer to join the Black Slate Atlanta movement, email us at blackslateatl10@yahoo.com. Also, visit our website at www.blackslateatl.org or scan our QR code for more information. Join us again for the next Black Slate Atlanta podcast and help us help you by holding our elected officials accountable to the needs and interests of our community.